there will be a button where you can rate every talk you see. And give feedback to the speaker, which would be very nice. So please welcome Lasse.
Thank you very, very much. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my exploits at, or not exploits actually, that's the wrong crowd, or what I do at Roskilde Festival. As you know, some of you, this is one of the stages on Roskilde Festival, the orange stage, the centerpiece. If you've been there, you've definitely seen this. And if you have never been to Roskilde Festival, I will definitely encourage you to go, even though that pop music and what's up in the times isn't you. There's lots of other great stuff going on. These are some of the people that attended the first Roskilde Festival back in 1971. They're not so young anymore. Today was supposed to be the 50th time a Roskilde Festival was going to be executed, but because of Corona, of course, it was shut down. These are the bands that played. This is the original poster from '71. I'm not even sure that any of these are bands anymore. I don't recognize any of the names other than one or maybe two of them. But that also just goes to say that the program has changed a lot, and the kind of music that's being played also changes. So I think in order to stay alive this long, you need to be able to change with the times. This is the festival seen from above. You have the orange stage right here in the middle. We have the festival grounds centered around that. It goes over to this big tent arena and down to these stages down here. And then out on the outer skirts you have all the camping areas, which is these blue tent patches, and also some volunteer camping over here. You can see over here that there's a gravel pit, and the area is polluted with gravel, and the Danish government mandates that you actually dig that stuff up. So at some point, this gravel pit over here is going to extend and actually eat some of the festival area here, and we have a similar problem on the other side. This area is probably slated to be demolished maybe next year or the year after that. So not just the music changes, but also the physical boundaries around the festival changes, which actually encourages us to do quite a lot of replanning and rethinking of how the festival grounds look, and how we actually do a festival and how we get people moved in and out. So a little bit about me. My name is Lasse. I have been a network engineer since the year 2000. I have been with big companies like IBM and AT&T. I also worked for Danish National Bank, and is now back at IBM. I mostly do data center stuff and whatever is associated with the data center infrastructure in that kind of a setting. I've been a volunteer on the festival IT group since 2012. And today I'm head of network, server and infrastructure engineering at the Roskilde Festival. And if anyone wants to talk to me about more details of what's in my presentation, or want to reach out and maybe talk about volunteering in my or similar departments, please feel free to reach out on the email here. And this is, by the way, the look of someone who's been working for a week and a half almost non-stop, and then we put a lot of beer and tequila on top of that. That was a very, very long day. The stages, or some numbers about the festival. These are from last year. We have 8 stages, some of them big, some of them small. There are about 180 music acts and concerts, and 200 other performances or art projects, graffiti, and all kinds of other stuff. So a lot of fun and interesting stuff is going on. There's about 31,000 volunteers, which is quite a lot. About 100,000 guests. Some of them are there for the entire week, and some of them are only there for one day. And in total, this makes us the 4th largest city in Denmark while the festival is ongoing. So I reside within Festival IT, and we are basically a 300-person strong IT department. We have 8 people that do planning and special projects. They are part of a year-round effort to make sure that the IT offering we have is fit for the festival, and the plans and ideas the festival has are being met by a proper IT solution. We also have an internal development department that does some of our internally developed solutions. We have some things I'll get into a bit later. We have an HR and volunteer support group that makes sure that we are hydrated and wear sunscreen when the sun is hot and out. They also arrange our barbecue parties when we're out there, and make sure that we are taken good care of, which is also something that you need to really look out for your volunteers when you have people donating their time and their work. We have just north of 60 people doing cables. We run about 30 kilometers of copper cabling each year, RJ45 PDS cable, Ethernet cabling. And we have 60 people doing that, running cables, putting on RJ45 plugs and stuff like that. Make sure that the cables are out of sight and out of mind of all the happy volunteers that might want to pull down something they can see and reach. It happens actually. We also have a teardown or a device rescue team that makes sure that all the stuff that we have put up during the build is actually being pulled down again and put into storage. We sometimes they don't get to equipment in time, which means that we actually seen switches reappear 2 years after because someone opened a box they had taken home. So even though they don't get to it, sometimes it actually gets back. We have a support department, around 80 people. That's first level supporters that pick up the phone when someone calls in about the services we provide. It's also on-site people on the festival grounds to provide support for merchants having problems that we can't fix over the phones. And they are 24/7 when the festival starts. So that's why they need that many people for that. And then the build division, which I'm part of, we have a Wi-Fi config and a Wi-Fi deploy. Wi-Fi config makes sure that the controllers and the access points are patched, has the right configuration. And the deploy guys make sure that they actually get put up so guests can't reach them. We have a point of sales pickup team, so every merchant has to pick up their own point of sales terminal and equipment. We also have a point of sale deploy group for our own internal stuff. We actually deploy and make sure that the point of sale terminals work. So for the internal bars, they don't have to do that themselves. We do that for them. And then core config, which is my team, small group of 13 people. We have server profiles and we have network profiles and general purpose guys that can do some programming to do some of the stuff that I'll talk about later. And then we have the deploy group that actually takes care of taking the equipment we have configured and then putting it into the field, hooking it up, making sure there's power on and it's connected and everything works. With those people, it's very important for us that we delegate. If we have 300 people, we can't have top management. We need to be able to enforce people to actually do work on their own. If they see a problem, they fix a problem. So we delegate not just the work, but also the responsibility, and make sure that everyone is capable of actually taking a decision when stuff gets real. And that means that we need great people. We need people that can actually take that decision and defend it if pushed by someone else, and actually defend that. We also do a lot of volunteer care because it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to. We want people to get back, to come back year after year, because obviously that means that we can build on the experiences we make year after year. And delegate both responsibility and job is very important. I say that multiple times because it is the core of what we do. We make sure that every decision that we can make at the ground level is made at the ground level. Obviously, there's a lot of beer involved. This is a festival. We do this for fun in our spare time. what's so fun about spending 1.5 or 2 weeks working 12, 14 hour days? Well, basically the people. There are actually 6 people in the room right now that has been doing festival with me at some point in time. And if you ask some of them, I'm sure that they will testify that one of the reasons they came back was because of the other great volunteers that were actually there. Not just the work, because the work is fun. We do stuff at a scale that most other volunteer organizations don't get to play with. And as I said, retention is very important, so we don't have to make the same mistakes over and over, year. This actually was, my boss made me put this one in. We actually run this like a small IT business that's about the size of 300 people. We have the teams and the organization and management structure is more or less taken from what you would expect from a small business like that. And we actually did some calculations a few years back where we calculated what would it actually cost to run this if we had to buy in consultants and buy it from real businesses. And the amount of work of money we make it for is a fraction of the cost that, because we would have overtime, we would have, really expensive hourly wages. So we're very cheap in what we do. So what do we actually do? We build an ISP from a greenfield. We do it in a week. But we have lots of fiber in the ground. We don't start from an actual greenfield. We have a lot of infrastructure in place so we can plug into. We have also tried it a few times before, so it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel from each year. And we actually also have a plan for how to do this. I will get back to planning later in the presentation. Right. So, the equipment we use for the fixed equipment, it's basically Juniper equipment. We have some EX, several varieties of EX switches, both the 2200C, which is silent, which means that we can actually put it into an office container or something like that. We have the 33 and the 3200 and the 4200 EX switches. The reason we have so many different is because some we bought, some has been donated, some and some has been bought later. So when we couldn't buy the 3200 anymore, we had to buy the 3300. So that's the reason for that. We also have the ACX routers we use as MPLS routers, and the MX80 routers, which are the core devices that we use for this gig. And then we also have some firewalls, both the SRX 340, which is our central firewall, and the SRX 210, which we use for special projects. And our CPE is actually a stupid Syxel 8-port switch. We can't monitor it, we can't do anything about it, but it fits the purpose by converting one Ethernet cable to 7. This is more or less what the network looks like. Up here in the top, we have 4 permanent backbone routers. They run MPLS on 10 gig. We have some office locations. We have 2 office locations. That's also where we have the data centers, where the firewall, Wi-Fi controllers, and our servers are placed. And then each year we build this infrastructure where we have 2 backbone routers, also MX80s, and then in a central location. And then all these MPLS routers are placed around the festival site, which means that we can maintain a ring structure of our POP switches. So if we have a switch that can connect to 2 of these remote MPLS routers, we can do that, or we can connect to a remote and a central one, or to 2 central one on the fiber connections. It depends largely on topology and where stuff is placed. The CPEs are of course coupled up to a POP switch, and then on the CPE we can put point of service terminals, laptops, or Wi-Fi access points, or the Wi-Fi access points can also be connected to the POP switches directly, depending on what's closest. All the green ones here, we run an MPLS network. We do LDP, ISIS, and multi-protocol BGP. Really plain stupid. There's nothing fancy in there at all. In the first couple of years, we actually more or less rebuilt and re-architected the MPLS network from the ground up because we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. We have settled on something that's easy, cheap, and stupid. So our goal is actually that we are able to troubleshoot when we are very, very drunk. That is a stated goal, because that is often what happens when the music starts and it gets late in the evening. So as stupid as possible and as simple as possible. The pop switches, we run between 3 and 5 VRFs on those, because we have some different use cases. We both have some normal internet access. We also have some video VRFs. I'll actually get into a little bit about that later. But we have a few VRFs, and then for each VRF we have a link VLAN on these links, and then we run OSPF per VRF on these links. And each pop switch for the CPEs just connect to one VLAN per switch. So if it's a 48 port switch, potentially we can connect up to 48 CPEs, and they can have 7 devices on those CPEs. So that is a little bit more than /24, but in practice that's never what we see. So yeah, the connection into the backbone routers here is these links are typically fiber connections, or they are fiber connections, and then from here in the rest of the access ring is fiber or regular Ethernet cabling, and sometimes we also do some point-to-point wireless links. Yeah. So that's the cable stuff. Looks really simple. It isn't. Well, it is, but it's a bit more complicated than that at least. We also have some wireless equipment. We both have the Mikrotik M and boxes, the antenna with the integrated base station. For our sector antennas, we have 3 sites around the festival grounds where we have these sector antennas up, and then we use the SXTs for CPEs. We have a solution where we just hook a CPE or a CPE switch directly up to the SXT, but we can also hook up a pop switch, so we can get the full suite of VRFs over a wireless link. And then for regular customer wireless, we have a lot of Ruckus equipment and a bunch of different APs and stuff like that. So I'm not going to talk a lot about Wi-Fi, but we have it, and we actually provide. We sell a Wi-Fi network to those who want to buy it and spend some money on that, because we actually have in our contracts that you can't put up your own wireless network, because we want to control as much of the spectrum. We consider even the 2.5 and 5 GHz spectrum as ours. We have specified in contracts that you can't use it for anything during this period. And we have separated into 2.4 is for customer Wi-Fi, an access point where you can connect with your laptop or your phone, and 5 GHz DFS channels also for customer Wi-Fi. And the non-DFS channels is mostly what we use for the point-to-point links and the sector links, because they will get interrupted less than the DFS channels will. We have to use some DFS channels for that, but we tend to use that in the areas that aren't that heavily populated, and basically just accept that Wi-Fi sucks sometimes. These are the 3 big sites that you can see. We have some reuse of some of the frequencies here and here and here and here, and because of the distance, that's quite possible. But if you have something down here that connects to something up here, and you cross a lot of people that in their tent has turned on hotspot on their phones, they are still emitting maybe a 2.5 or maybe a 5 gig signal up into the air. And you can't see that noise on either end. Signal to noise is really, really good at either end, but the signal that comes through is crap. So, I think we spent 2 days trying to figure out what was going on. But in any case. And these are, I think this one down here is in 10 meters. This is 42 meters, and this is 40 meters. This is a truck with a mast that you can shoot up in the air. This one we borrow and rent in. So we can actually cover most of the festival grounds with wireless if we want to. So the customer-facing services is basically general internet access. We don't do that much fancy, primarily for the point-of-sales terminals, but also for people to put on their laptop so they can order more stuff for next day's business, or stream videos or whatever they want to do. It's general internet access. It's behind a firewall, so you can't get a public IP, but you can get a private IP and then get access to the internet. And then the point of sales terminals, we also support those or provide those to them. And then we also have some special projects like video and some gate systems, some entrance system they're playing around with, trying to put IT in those instead of having some volunteers standing there. They just scan your wristband and get access. Some internal services. We have an order system where people, the merchants, they order whatever they need from the IT department. We have a system called DOG that takes care of provisioning, deploy and teardown support. I'll get into that, and also some mapping services. And for infrastructure, what you basically need: DNS, DCP, NTP. To keep everything in sync, we have an internal SSH jump host, and then we have some monitoring systems. That's basically what we do for infrastructure services. So the tools we use are ESXi on our servers to create VMs. Then we use LXC containers to carve those VMs further up into contexts where we can separate applications, so we don't have everything on one big fat host with all the fun stuff in dependencies that brings along. We run everything on Ubuntu, Linux, and we use LibreNMS for monitoring. We use Ansible for server provisioning and for a bit of the network stuff. And we use PHP IPAM for IP address management, and GitLab to take care of all our source code. And then we have built a lot of stuff internally. So DOG, which was basically an asset tracking system when it started. One guy who was tired of doing Excel sheets and manual configuration sat down and started coding some PHP, and I think 1 or 2 days later he had something we could actually use. And that has since evolved into this big system that is the focal point of everything we do. All the functions that we have to custom make, we build it as a function in DOG. We have an outage page that looks at not just up-down like LibreNMS does, but also look at the redundancy in the access rings, and if a POP switch doesn't have 2 links that are up in OSPF, it pops up on the outage page, and we can take a look at that. It could be a failure. It could be just because that cable is not connected yet or not actually done. We also do some scraping of the MikroTik devices and put up a dashboard of SNR and other nice stuff that talks about the health of the MikroTik devices. And then we have a bunch of helper scripts, small stuff, primarily in Python. We also have some in Bash. I try to encourage people to use Python instead of doing all kinds of weird stuff, and I consider Bash scripts weird stuff in this case. We also have so MikroTik, you have to use a stupid application that's Windows only, and we have a really clever guy who's actually here today who built that's just a CTP engine for actually serializing, configuring, and uploading new software to the MikroTik devices. So instead of having manually to handle it and doing a lot of stuff that may take 15, 20, 30 minutes for a device, then it's done in less than 5. That really saves us time. We also have the field checker, so whenever a device comes online and they mark it as online in the DOG mobile app, then it actually goes out and checks if it has a default gateway in the VRFs. It looks at OSPF and all that kind of stuff that we actually care about, and as soon as that field checker says green, then it pops up on another list, so we can actually go and tell the support guys that this switch is now ready. You can send out the supporters to actually see if the deployments that are the customers connected to that, if they are happy and if it works. Yeah, and then we also use Ansible for quick fixes, and we also use it to handle the servers and also our deployment room to run the CTP process for the Juniper switches. So configuration rollout started out, as a manual, time-consuming mess, to be honest. We were constantly behind. Whenever people said we need the switch for this and this place, we said, well, yeah, we can take care of that. We just need to do this first, and then we can do it, and then come back in 3 hours. Right now, with this setup that we've made, we are, and we made so many mistakes that whenever we had to fix an error, there was usually travel time involved, because it was, of course, it was on the far end of the festival grounds. And then we had to go fix that and spend 1 or 2 hours to maybe fix an IP address on a port, which is just plain stupid. So in Dog, we actually do a model of the entire network. It integrates into the IPAM system and picks IP addresses when we do the modeling, reserves them as well. And then it can build a config based on the templates we've provided. It's powered by Ginger, of course, like every other template engine out there. Then when it has the configuration ready, it puts it on an FTP server, and that means that at that point we can either serialize the switch in our deployment room, which is the nice 20-foot container you see there, CTP it, or if it's already in operation, we can push the config to the device. We haven't automated that yet. We still want to actually have hands-on before we just push the config. I think maybe next year or the year after that we will automate that as well. And the CTP process is basically that you serialize the switch, you hook it up to a port, and it gets an IP, a DHCP address from the DHCP server, and depending on the DHCP options, we can direct it to go fetch the image, a new image, and the specific config file. It's based on the MAC address of the device. It reboots a few times and then it's done. And again, just like the MikroTik stuff, instead of spending maybe half an hour configuring 10 devices, then 10 devices can be done in 15 minutes. And it's mostly just hooking it up and pressing play on the Ansible playbook, and then it handles it itself. It's really cool. That means that you're not standing typing and doing stuff all the time. You're actually more monitoring what's going on and fixing the stuff that doesn't go as planned. That's a real time saver. Dog is also deployment support. We can mark some specific phases in the deployment process, and depending on where in the phase and the field checker, it gets pushed further along the line of the deployment process. It also has a map where we pull data from LibreNMS. In all the configs, we know where they're supposed to be, so we have a GPS coordinate in the config. So a Dog takes that information from LibreNMS and the state of the device and puts it on a map, so we can see the correct placement. And that's actually really good, because then we can see if a whole area loses power. It's really easy to see when we have a lot of these devices. So if it's a whole string of devices, then it's probably because someone knocked over the power generator. If it's only one device, it could be that someone is charging their phone. We have actually had people pull out the power cable for the network switch because they needed to charge their phone. And they were quite happy about that, because 1, they got their phone charged, and 2, the noise went away. Exactly. People are that stupid. So, of course, we are an outdoor festival as well, and what can you do about that? Well, you can buy outdoor rated equipment. That's typically comes at a premium. Or you can do something like this, what we have here. This is an indoor or regular power over Ethernet repeater, 1 gig Ethernet repeater. And then 1 or 2 euro enclosure for connecting your power plugs in the garden. And it fits perfectly in. You can have PoE cable in and PoE cable out, and then you can do your repeat of your Ethernet signal. And as long as this is not lying in a puddle of water, this will actually keep everything running for the remainder of the festival, which is, I mean, it's supposed to work for a week. It doesn't need to be completely IP67 weatherproof. A lot less can do it actually. We also have some outdoor racks, and most of the equipment is actually placed in tents like this. And it may be okay if the equipment gets a little damp. You don't necessarily need to follow the equipment vendors' guidelines for operating environment. They work outside that as well. Sunlight can actually be a problem. A good example is over here on the right. That's an MX80 router in a rack that is yay high. It's upside down, not upside down. It's vertical. And this rack was actually sitting in direct sunlight. And we got alarms because the MX80 thought it was maybe a little too much with an inlet temperature of about 70 degrees. So these red pipes is actually an effort to try to get some cold air in. The pipes go down and out the bottom of the rack, so cold air in and hot air out of the rack. I think that only lowered the temperature something like 5, maybe 10 degrees. But it had some effect. The real effect was to actually put a sunshade up so the sunlight didn't hit the rack, and actually sending someone out to open the door and guard the rack if it got too hot. That's when you talk about volunteer care, that's maybe not what you want to do with your volunteers all the time, but in a pinch it can do. So we have about 70 of these outdoor racks, and if the good thing about them is that they when we deploy them, the tent that the equipment would otherwise have to be in doesn't have to be there. And if the tent crew comes 2 days after we would like to deploy, then we put the rack instead. For indoor rack, this is actually the image of our first indoor rack for the central equipment. In that hole we have there in the middle, there were 2 MX80 routers. They were our redundant backbone placed right on top of each other. And of course, the first year we were there, one of them broke after the festival had opened. We did not have any spares at that time. We wanted redundancy. We couldn't get an MX80 replacement until the festival was done. But fortunately, we had a juniper SE in the team at the time who had an MX router in the office, in their lab. So they went in and got that. It was an MX480, so instead of 2.5 units, it's now 8 units. That doesn't fit in that rack. But the sides, there's room for 1 person in front of this rack. And then there's about 2 meters before you can be more people. So we had one guy standing in front of this rack with an MX480 on the other side, reconnecting the cables. I was sitting in the NOC and reconfiguring the devices, and port numbering on the MX80 is not easy to understand. It's flipped around in crazy ways. That was a very, very long night. So have spare equipment if you have some important equipment, or be able to procure some at a short notice. Then we moved out to these outdoor racks. As you can immediately see, we have more space. The cables you have here is what goes into the rack we saw on the previous slide. So we just moved the equipment rack outside, and we have 2 of them. And these are our servers, which is actually just desktop machines. Worked fine for a while. We have something else now. We used this for a couple of years, and then we got a cheap data center container, a 20-foot container, split up into separate departments with a door in each end. Data center rated actually, and now we have 2 racks in each, regular indoor racks with lots of space for equipment and lots of space to work, and yeah, so that's fun. So permanent versus temporary. Temporary may be okay. Strips is better than tape if you want to put up a cable. It's easier to put a pair of clippers to a plastic strip than to some tape that always leaves residue and is easy and it's difficult to handle. And you only want to use enough. You don't want to use more than enough. And when is that? Well, I don't know. Figure it out. But definitely consider that someone is going to have to take this equipment down and this cable down at some point. Unless you're actually doing a permanent installation, it has to be brought back. And one of the things that we have also had a lot of luck with is actually converting some of our temporary installations to permanent installations. In the beginning, we built everything, including firewalls and servers, each year. Now the firewalls and servers has been moved into the permanent data centers, which means that we save something like half a day to a day in our build process, which is quite a lot and quite considerable, because it happens on the front end of everything, which means that we were slowing everyone else down in the beginning. We don't do that anymore. And when you plan on doing something permanent, of course you need to figure out, are you going to stay at this venue for more than for more than 1 year or 2 years? Are there anything to consider there? Is the environment suitable for permanent equipment? What happens in wintertime? What happens in summertime? Run cables if you can. Use wireless if you must, even on short distances. In some cases, it's actually better to protect a cable than. And this actually happened. A guy like that forgot to put the thingies down, and he cut down 5 cables in like 2 minutes. And when people figured it out, he was long gone. That took a lot of time as well. So trucks tend to end up in places they shouldn't. Sometimes lightning strikes. And then there are other cases of device placement seemed fine, and have a plan, mitigate what you can, mitigate also what's unlikely. I mean, lightning strikes is unlikely, but they do happen. So have a spare if you can. This is this is a deployment bundle of an EX4200C and an SRX210. It was actually deployed on the floor level. But then it started raining. The building was without a side from waist up, and there was a hole in the roof. So this was actually getting wet. So, and this was after the festival had started. So we were out pulling in the equipment and see how long could we actually extend the cables. And then we just did a lot of strips to make sure that it was up and in, so it didn't get rained on. That's usually fine. This is the pictures of an actual lightning strike. This plug is one of those clear Ethernet plugs. Down here we have some black scoring on the power supply, and over here we have the port that has exploded. We had to buy a new box, by the way. And of course, consider what your critical paths are. Is it time? Do you have some time frames? When can you start? When do you have to be done? Do you have any gates in between? Do you have any other dependencies like tents being there, power being available, fences for your cable runs, stuff like that? And your own utilization. Do you have any blockers within your own team? This is an overview of our block diagram. We have some stuff in the beginning. Before we have some special stuff that we have to take care of before we actually get the config factory and the deployments ready. We do a lot of planning. We spend, in a normal year, we start planning in August, October for the next year's festival, because they have the festival has a lot of plans and a lot of ideas. Some of them becomes reality, some of them does not. But we have to plan with the current plan, or for the current plan. And sometimes those plans change 2 months before the festival, or 1 month before. And then all of a sudden, there's a tent out in the middle of nowhere that needs power, water, and internet. And then we maybe have to dig something or use a wireless link, and it's maybe too important for a wireless link, and then we have to figure out something else to do. But the reason we survive this is because we actually have some infrastructure that's capable and flexible. We use this map or similar maps quite a lot, and if you're doing something similar or just an event like Bornhack, maps is essentials. They are very important to make sure that everyone has a common understanding of where things is and what they are called. On the Roskilde Festival, things have the same areas has changed names so many times that even though I've been there for 8 years, there are people still around that calls a specific area a name that I have never heard it used as. So that's at least 10 years old, because it's changed names so many times. They just refer to the term they were using the first time they heard it, but have a common understanding of what you're doing. And when all this is done, then we have to actually test it. And how do we do that? Of course, by buying something. In this case, White Russian, I think, and some beer. There's one last thing I want to share with you. And that is an overlay solution we did for the light controllers. On the orange stage, they obviously have a lot of lights and stuff they control with DMX, which is light controller protocol. That's a layer 2 thing. You can't route that, or at least they couldn't figure out how to do that. So we had to do a layer 2 solution because, of course, they wanted to control lights on the other side of the crowd, which were on the other side of the network, which meant that we could not do a layer 2. We had to do a layer 3, routed over layer 3. So we built something like this, where we took some of the SRX 210s. These are 4 of them. We had one light controller remote on two remote light controllers, and then we had two central firewalls. And these firewalls were connected with a GRE tunnel that ran IPsec encryption. The reason we do that is because IPsec is really, really good at chopping up a packet if it's too large for the MTU, and then reassemble it on the other end. And then you don't have to worry about don't fragment and all that kind of stuff. And then we run LDP, OSPF, BGP, and MPLS over that GRE tunnel, and then we run VPLS, a VPLS service across that MPLS network, which meant that we could do a layer 2 transparent point-to-point from here to here, and from here to here, and then do a layer 2 port in the switch part of the firewall, which meant that the light controller here can talk to this light controller and this light controller. And we were really proud of the solution, and it worked, and it actually looked fine. And then on every concert we went to that year on the orange stage, we looked at the lights on the back of the crowds, and they never used them. They never used them. We were so disappointed. And then the last night, this happened. It worked. They were using our bloody solution. It was amazing. And then this happened. It was amazing. It was an amazing night. I almost get emotional talking about it. So it's a lot of hard work. We have a lot of fun doing it. There's a lot of heavy drinking involved, yes. And whatever you do in an event like this, there's one thing above all else: make sure you have a plan B. This may be a little simple. It was our boss that came up with this one. Go figure. And that was it for me. Thank you.
We still have 10 minutes for questions. So.
Do you have cooling for the data center container?
Cooling for the data center container? Yes, we have a regular AC unit that sits and puts heat from the inside to the outside. Yes.
What are common failures you encountered?
Common failures? So common failures is actually someone unplugging the power. It is a cable, maybe a plug that hasn't been connected properly to the cable. So the cable guys have to go out and fix that. Trucks that are in places they shouldn't be. We had a specific area where they had a truck port on one end of the area. It was an enclosed area in the camping site, and on the other end there was a smaller port for vans and walking people. And the truck went in. It was supposed to back out. It didn't back out. It went straight through. It pulled down the cable on top of the gate and pulled out the switches from both ends of the. It took a few hours to fix that, but it's it's the stupid stuff that trips us over. The network equipment works sometimes. Sometimes we. So one year we had deployed a switch on the wall of the back of the tent, like there. We pulled had vertical, and we had stripped it back to the back of the tent, and it looked fine. There was nothing in the tent basically when we arrived, so we just put it up where we thought it was easiest for the cables to get into the switch. And then 2 days later, we have to replace the switch because it had died. And we come out with the switch, with the replacement switch, and we figure out why it has died, because this tent is being used to prepare food. It was a wet year, so the humidity was about 100%. And actually up under the switch, halfway covering, was a pizza oven. So the temperature was, I don't know how hot it was for the switch, but I mean, 100% humidity and a lot of heat kills the switch. So we had to move that a little bit before we replaced it. I mean, so those are actually one of the cases where you can't really, it's difficult to plan for, difficult to avoid unless you actually go out to each and every deployment each day and make adjustments like that. So we just have to make some assumptions when we get into an empty tent and see, well, is this a good place? Yeah, why not? So yeah. Yes?
When and how do you recruit new IT people?
So when and how do we recruit new IT people? Well, this is actually kind of a recruitment event for me. Typically, we do that throughout the year. Typically, we start up in spring and late winter. But if the right people come along, we will happily onboard them if we have an available spot for them. Yes.
You said you were doing DMX with lights transportation with a lot of overlays.
Mm-hmm.
Do you also do with something with the video images? Do you also do the video and music network as well? Was that a separate network altogether?
So what?
For the screens you see on the side, the projectors and the audio stuff, because it also usually gets routed or gets done by internet anyway.
Yeah. So the question is, do we do anything with the video for the screens next to the stages and all the AV production? Not really, no. They typically take care of that from the front of house and do separate cabling from that. We do have some stages that are doing, should we say, remote production, so they have a production office behind one of the stages, and that takes care of 3 or 4 stages. And for them, we carry some traffic for them, some video feeds, more or less primarily, so they can see what's happening on the remote stages. In some cases, Danish radio broadcasting, they typically rent a fiber from our fiber plant, so they can do their stuff. And we also sometimes rent out a fiber for some of the tele providers for their 4G stuff. Yeah. Yes, in the back. Do we IPv6? Yes and no. So on the wireless side, when you connect to a wireless with your laptop or your phone, you actually get an IPv6 address, yes. We don't have DNS resolution over V6. We don't run our own DNS servers for that part, but you can get an IP address and you can get IPv6 transport from your device. For the cabled infrastructure, the older EX switches do not have IPv6 support, unfortunately. Some of the newer ones do, but we can't deploy IPv6 generally before we are rid of the old ones, unfortunately. It is one of the projects that are very close to my heart, so thank you very much for that question. Yes?
Do you have a plan to replace people when they are going out? Regulation.
Yeah, we have quite high retention in the management team. I think we have very little change. On the volunteer side, depending on the groups, for the cabling guys, they have a rather high cycle rate. In my team, we have a rather low cycle rate. I have people that have been with us for as long as me, and some of them has only been there for a few years. But we see people come and go. Some are there for a year or 2 or 3 or 4 maybe, and then they don't want to do this anymore for various reasons. Some of them are kind enough to point at someone else that might take their place. That's always nice when that happens. And we normally also have people on, I wouldn't necessarily say a waiting list, but we have some people that have showed interest that we then poke if a spot becomes available. But recruiting is a big issue and something we need to take care of, because I mean we are running these teams as close to the minimum needed as possible. So when one or maybe even two people that are really great doesn't want to play with us anymore, then it can leave a big hole in the organization. Thank you. Yes?
So to block incoming connections to your public IPv6 address, how does your not behind the net device anymore?
So the device giving you an IPv6 address is actually the firewall. The Wi-Fi controller just ports you through on layer 2, so it's actually the firewall that connects you. That's the first IPv6 hub, and we have it is a firewall, so we only allow outgoing connections. Thank you. Anything else? If you come up with questions later, I'm here all day, and feel free to reach out to me on my email, and if you figure out something later. Thank you.